A routine traffic stop turns into a nightmare when a 45-year-old black woman is arrested, silenced, and paraded through a corrupt court as a nameless criminal. Beaten, erased from federal records, and stripped of her identity, no one realizes she's actually a supervisory special agent for the DOJ, sent to investigate systemic racism in that very county. But what was meant to break her only sets the stage for a stunning reversal. In a fiery act of resistance, she exposes the entire system, turning a courtroom into ground zero for a reckoning the nation will never forget. Before we dive into this shocking mystery, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you love thrilling, jaw-dropping stories, don't forget to subscribe. The sun was dipping behind the trees, casting long golden streaks across the two-lane highway that cut through Montgomery County like an old scar. The late summer air clung to the windshield as Danielle Royce, 45, drove in silence, jazz humming low from the speakers. She wore a navy blouse, dark slacks, and a silver chain, professional, understated. She had taken this road a dozen times to visit her sister. But this time, something felt off. Her fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel as headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Too close. The patrol car's lights began flashing. She sighed, eased the car onto the gravel shoulder, and rolled her window down. Calm. Composed. She knew the drill. Too well. Two white officers emerged. One approached her window slowly. The other stayed near the rear, hand already hovering near his holster. "Evening, ma'am," said the first, Officer Landon Hayes. Early 40s. Smug. "You know why we stopped you?" Danielle offered a polite nod. "I assume it has to do with my tail light. I wasn't aware it was out." Hayes didn't answer. He looked her over too long, like he was searching for something beyond her skin, something to confirm a narrative he'd already built in his mind. "We'll see. License and registration." Danielle handed it over, without a word. Then the second officer, Brent Mercer, younger, bulkier, tapped the trunk with his flashlight. "She seemed nervous to you?" Mercer said loudly, so Danielle would hear. "I'm not nervous," she said calmly. "Just wondering if this is really about a tail light." Hayes grinned. "Step out of the vehicle." That's when her stomach dropped. "Officer, may I ask why? I've complied." "Step. Outside now." She opened the door. The gravel crunched beneath her shoes as she stepped out slowly, hands visible. She thought about the DOJ badge in the secret compartment behind her glove box. She thought about revealing it, ending this now. But something told her. This went deeper. Hayes moved fast. He twisted her arm behind her back and yanked the other into cuffs. No warning, no resistance, no hesitation. "You're under arrest for resisting and suspicion of possession," he said coolly. "What?" Her voice cracked. "What possession? You haven't searched—" Mercer popped the trunk. Well, what do we have here?" he called out, holding up a Ziploc bag of white powder she'd never seen before. Danielle's knees nearly gave out. "That's not mine. That's—" "We'll let the lab sort that out," Hayes interrupted. She was shoved into the back seat of the cruiser. The door slammed. Her purse, phone, everything gone. Outside, the two officers laughed. One mimicked her voice. The other lit a cigarette. From the back of the cruiser, Danielle stared ahead in stunned silence. A burning wave of humiliation crawled up her chest. Her thoughts spiraled. Should I speak up? Show them who I am. Pull rank. But the instincts of a seasoned federal agent screamed louder. Not yet. Not here. Not with them. At the station, she was booked under the name Danielle Ross. Her ID had mysteriously vanished from the evidence tray. The drugs were recorded. A mugshot snapped. Her hair, once neatly styled, now hung loose and disheveled. The holding cell was cold. She sat on the metal bench, arms folded tightly, heart thudding with fury. No phone call, no lawyer, no Miranda rights ever spoken. A young black officer glanced at her file that night and furrowed his brow. "You sure this is her name?" he asked quietly. "Something ain't right." Hayes glared at him. "You want to keep your job? Keep walking." Morning came with fluorescent lights and shackles. Her wrists were cuffed tightly in front of her, chains connecting her ankles. The orange jumpsuit scratched against her skin. A deep shame settled in her bones, not because she was guilty, but because she was being paraded like a criminal in a world that wouldn't question it. a world that wanted this image of her to be truth. She was brought to the county courthouse in the early hours. People stared, some whispered, others smirked. She kept her eyes down, but her jaw clenched tighter with every step. In the courtroom, she stood before Judge Elias Granger, an aging white man with a reputation for order and discipline in his court, especially when it came to defendants who looked like Danielle. The bailiff called her name, Danielle Ross. "That's not," she began. "Speak again and I'll hold you in contempt." Judge Granger barked. The courtroom chuckled. Even the prosecutor, ADA Mark Whitman, a clean-cut Ivy League type, rolled his eyes. The officers testified with ease, detailing a suspicious woman who refused to show ID and acted erratically. Danielle stared at them, stunned at how seamless the lies flowed from their mouths. She tried to object. The judge silenced her. "We'll set bail at $100,000 due to the severity of the narcotics charge," Granger announced. She stood frozen. "That's impossible. I don't have—" "Then you'll sit in county," he interrupted. No one asked who she really was. No one asked if she had legal counsel. No one cared. That night back in her cell, Danielle stared at the ceiling. The tears finally came, but silently. Not because she was broken, but because she felt invisible in a system she had once believed in. She had trained agents, investigated human trafficking rings, stood beside federal prosecutors in high-level cases. And none of it mattered here. She was just another black woman in a jumpsuit, another case closed. The system didn't see her badge. They didn't care about her credentials. All they saw was skin. Her breathing slowed. Her mind sharpened. "They think I'm nobody." Good. She looked at the security camera in the corner, her expression changing. Hardened now. Focused. They had no idea what storm they'd just unleashed. The morning air was thick with humidity as Danielle Royce shuffled down the courthouse corridor in shackles. Chains clinked with each slow step, echoing off the sterile walls like a cruel reminder of her new reality. Her orange jumpsuit clung to her skin, the fabric still damp from a cold cell bench. Her wrists bore red marks from over-tightened cuffs. Her ankles ached from being yanked out of bed at 5 a.m. by guards who didn't bother with explanations. They didn't see her as a person. Just a number, a body, another case. She had once trained agents on how to identify institutional bias. She had once stood in the halls of the DOJ and spoken on panels about civil liberties. Now she stood before a courtroom full of strangers as a prisoner, her name distorted, her past erased. "Defendant, step forward," the bailiff barked, as if she were an animal to be herded. The room didn't stir. No one questioned the sight of a middle-aged black woman in chains. No one asked why her case had been rushed onto the docket. To them, she belonged there. Danielle lifted her chin. But inside something trembled. Rage and grief tangled beneath her stillness. How quickly the world had shifted. One day she was a respected federal agent with clearance codes and operational authority. The next she was Danielle Ross, a supposed drug trafficker from nowhere, facing a biased court with a stacked deck. Judge Elias Granger sat perched atop the bench like a king in an aging robe, his gavel resting, his lips curled into that smirk of smug familiarity. He knew this routine well, and he especially knew how to make examples out of defendants who looked like her. "I've reviewed the case file," he said, barely glancing her way. "Traffic stop, narcotics found, resisted arrest. Sounds pretty straightforward." Danielle opened her mouth to speak. "Your Honor!" Granger slammed his gavel down. "I didn't ask for a commentary, Miss Ross." A few people chuckled from the gallery. Her humiliation burned deeper. She wanted to scream, not just for herself, but for every woman of color who had ever stood here, stripped of dignity, treated like noise. The prosecutor, ADA Mark Whitman, adjusted his tie as he stood, looking her over like a man assessing property. "The state recommends denial of bail due to the gravity of the narcotics involved, as well as the defendant's lack of verifiable ID and suspicious behavior at the time of arrest." Danielle's pulse quickened. "That's not true." "Silence," Granger snapped. "This is a court, not a debate club." Her hands balled into fists, the cuffs digging into her wrists. She breathed deeply through her nose. "You've worked undercover before. You've seen worse. Breathe. Wait. Think." But the indignity kept compounding. Officer Landon Hayes took the stand, Uniform crisp, eyes cold. She was erratic, Your Honor. Refused to identify herself. When we searched the trunk, we found what appeared to be narcotics. We have reason to believe she's part of a larger trafficking operation. His words flowed with rehearsed ease. No hesitation, no flicker of guilt. The courtroom murmured. Danielle watched it unfold like a nightmare in slow motion. Mercer followed, with even more embellished lies, claiming she lunged during the stop, that she panicked, and threw something toward the back seat. The evidence was fiction, stitched together by the very people sworn to uphold truth. And still, no one questioned it. No defense attorney had been assigned. No one had interviewed her. The system moved with mechanical precision, steamrolling everything in its path. Danielle's lips trembled. This is what it feels like to disappear, to be erased from your own life. Granger leaned forward again, tapping the gavel like a ticking clock. Given the severity of the charge and lack of credible identification, I'm ordering continued detainment, no bail. We'll reconvene in 7 days for a preliminary hearing. 7 more days in that cage. 7 more days silenced, while her name was dragged through the mud. Danielle felt her knees weaken. Not from fear, but from fury buried so deep it had started to rot. She looked at the young black woman taking notes at the clerk's desk. Their eyes met for just a second, one heartbeat. In that glance, something passed between them. Recognition, not of identity, but of truth. The bailiff grabbed her arm. Let's go. As she was yanked toward the exit, one of the courtroom guards whispered with a snide grin. Bet you wish you'd kept your mouth shut now, huh? Danielle didn't answer. She looked forward, past the smirks, past the judge, past the rows of blank faces that had already made up their minds. In the transport van back to the jail, the silence was unbearable. She sat alone, her hands cuffed to a steel ring bolted to the floor. A single light flickered above her, casting shadows on the white walls. She stared at her reflection in the scratched metal door across from her. Who did they see? They saw a criminal, a liar, a threat. But who was she really? Supervisory Special Agent Danielle Royce, 13 years with the DOJ, lead investigator on a national corruption task force, decorated, trusted, invisible, and now, disposable. Her throat tightened. A scream built behind her chest, but she swallowed it. They don't get to hear me break. That night in her cell, she finally cried, quietly. A soundless flood of anger, betrayal, and helplessness. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall and whispered into the darkness, "How many more of us don't make it out?" The question echoed in the silence. And then, resolve. You will not die in chains. You were sent here for a reason. You finish what you started. Danielle sat upright. Even in a cage, her mind was still hers. Her story wasn't over. Not yet. The days blurred into one another inside the cell. Cold concrete, metal bars, and the relentless buzzing of overhead lights. Time didn't move forward. It just sat there stale and heavy, pressing against Danielle Royce's chest. She hadn't seen a lawyer, hadn't made a single call. She had no toothbrush, no change of clothes, no name. Just a case number on a clipboard and a jumpsuit that scratched at her skin like it had something to prove. The guards called her Ross. She didn't answer to it. "That's not my name," she had whispered again and again like a prayer. Like an anchor. Danielle Royce, Supervisory Special Agent. Badge 03821-J. DOJ Internal Affairs Division. The words were her tether to reality. But here in this place they meant nothing. Her DOJ badge? Missing. Her federal ID? Gone. Her fingerprint scan? No match. That last one hit the hardest. She sat on the corner of her cot, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, trying not to let the panic show in her breath. They'd wiped her from the system. Somehow they'd buried her identity under layers of falsified data and red tape. And the deeper she tried to think through it, the more the fear crept in. Not fear of death, but of erasure. That was the new tactic, wasn't it? Don't just kill the body. Kill the record. Make her just another unnamed black woman lost in a sea of case files no one ever reads. The jail's intake officer, a middle-aged white man with a gut and a lazy eye, brought her food trays without speaking. He always slammed them down harder than necessary. Today, she reached for her water, and he snatched it back. "You think you're somebody," he muttered. Danielle looked up slowly. Her face was blank, but her eyes burned. "I am somebody," she said quietly. He chuckled, took a bite of her cornbread, and walked off. That night she tried again. She tapped on the glass slot of her cell until a different guard walked over, Mendez, a younger Hispanic officer who hadn't yet been hardened by the cruelty around him. "I need to speak to a DOJ supervisor," she said, steady. "I'm a federal agent. There's been a mistake." He raised a brow. "Everyone in here says that." She exhaled. "Look at me. Listen to how I talk. Do I sound like a drug trafficker to you?" Mendez hesitated. "I can give you my clearance number. It's been erased from the system somehow. But there's a hidden backup. Red-level agents have it burned into DOJ redundancy files. You can access it through the internal terminal." Mendez glanced around. "You're serious?" "Yes, call Washington. Ask for Deputy Director Samuel Clark. Tell him Agent Royce is missing." His hesitation lingered, but then he nodded, just once, and walked off. For the first time in days, Danielle felt a flicker of hope, a single candle in a room that had gone pitch black. The next morning she was pulled from her cell. She expected to be taken to legal counsel. Maybe finally someone had found her record. Instead she was taken back to the interrogation room. Sitting at the table were Officers Hayes and Mercer, smiling. "Good morning, Miss Ross," Hayes drawled. "I see you've been trying to stir up trouble," Mercer added, leaning forward, "asking for outside calls, claiming you're some kind of secret agent." Danielle's spine straightened. "You know who I am." Hayes chuckled. "We know exactly who you are. You're a woman in chains facing a felony. That's who the court sees. That's who the public sees." He slid a paper across the table. "This is your plea deal. 10 years. Reduced to 7 if you confess now." She didn't touch it. "You're panicking," Mercer smirked, "because no one's coming for you. You've been buried, sweetheart. You're in our world now." She stared at them, mouth pressed into a hard line. "The deeper you try to bury me, the louder I'll rise." They laughed. Mercer leaned in close. "You think anyone will believe you? A black woman claiming to be a Fed? You'll be lucky if they don't add psychiatric evaluation to your sentence." Back in her cell, Danielle collapsed onto her cot and stared at the ceiling. Her fists clenched against the rising tide inside her, rage, grief, despair all surging at once. For a split second she wondered if they were right, if she really was alone, if she really was vanishing. But then she remembered the look on that young clerk's face in the courtroom, the one who saw her, even when no one else did. Someone always watches. Elsewhere, far from the jail, Agent Naomi Blake sat in her D.C. office scrolling through missed calls and unread memos. Danielle had gone silent days ago. No check-in, no data drops, nothing. Blake narrowed her eyes, opened a secure database, and typed in Royce Danielle-03821J. Search not found. "What the hell?" she whispered. She tried again. Still nothing. She ran DMV records, hospital logs, even private surveillance from the town Danielle had been headed to. The last ping was from a traffic cam on a stretch of Montgomery County Highway. After that, nothing. Naomi leaned back, alarm coursing through her veins. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Back at the jail, Danielle was curled in the corner of her cot, arms tight, body shivering not from cold but from the weight of the silence. Then, tap. A sound on the slot of her cell door. It opened. A paper slipped through. She cautiously picked it up. A single line was written in small, looping handwriting. "I know who you are. I'm watching. Hold on." No name. No signature. Just that. Danielle froze. She read it again. And again. Her breath caught in her throat. A spark ignited in her chest. She pressed the paper against her chest, eyes closing. It was enough. Enough to endure one more day. She wasn't alone. Someone still remembered her name. The camera in the corner of the cell whirred faintly as it adjusted. She looked straight into it for the first time. Let them watch. Let them see what happens when you try to erase a black woman who carries the truth. The storm outside the jail rolled in slowly, but inside Danielle's cell, thunder had been building for days. The air was electric with dread. The paper note pressed into her chest the night before still trembled slightly in her hands. 8 simple words. I know who you are. I'm watching. Hold on. Had reignited something inside her. A fire she had spent days trying to keep from flickering out. She didn't know who sent it. A clerk, a guard, an ally within the very system that had swallowed her whole. But it didn't matter. Someone saw her. Someone still knew her name. Danielle Royce, Supervisory Special Agent. Not Ross. Not inmate number 68,291. Not liar. Not addict. But they were trying to erase her inch by inch. And the terrifying part, it was almost working. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the silence had grown impossible to ignore. Agent Naomi Blake sat hunched over her desk at the Department of Justice, eyes bloodshot from 48 hours without sleep. Every search she ran hit a wall. Danielle's file? Gone. Clearance codes? Revoked. Even the internal DOJ backup archives, red level only, had been wiped. Who has the authority to do that? She muttered. She pulled out her secure phone and dialed the one number she hadn't dared to yet. Deputy Director Clark, a voice answered. Sir, it's Blake. We've lost Royce. I think she's been compromised. Define compromised. She vanished en route to Montgomery County. Her tracking ID, communications, wiped. But she's not in any system. It's like she's been ghosted. There was a long silence. Check local precincts, Clark said finally. Unregistered arrests. Court dockets with sealed names. Look for ghost entries. If someone's trying to bury her, they'll slip up. Keep me posted. Quietly. Naomi nodded. Yes, sir. Back in Montgomery County Jail, Danielle sat motionless as another guard came by with her breakfast. This one was new. Young. Black. The only one who ever made eye contact. Name? He asked, clipboard in hand. She looked him dead in the eye. Danielle Royce. Supervisory Special Agent. DOJ. He didn't flinch, but his eyes lingered a second longer. Then he scribbled Ross on the paper and left. But later that day, as she sat silently at the bench in the dim mess hall, a folded napkin appeared beside her tray. Scrawled on it in tiny block letters, Check Courtroom Archive. Clerk name, Tasha. Danielle froze. Her thoughts raced. Tasha, the young black court clerk from the day of her bail hearing. She had looked at Danielle like she saw through the chains, through the jumpsuit, through the performance. She hadn't laughed, hadn't smirked. She had seen her. That glance, just seconds long, might have been the only thing keeping her tethered to reality, and now it seemed Tasha had left a trail. The next day, in the courthouse's cramped filing room, Tasha moved quickly, her fingers trembling slightly as she scanned the dockets for that week's proceedings. There. One hearing, sealed from the public record. Defendant name, Danielle Ross. Charges, narcotics resisting arrest. Judge Granger, Prosecutor Whitman. Bail. Denied. She frowned. Ross wasn't even logged in the normal system. It had been hard-coded, manually input, with no attached ID, no case number matching arrest logs. It didn't belong. Tasha printed the page, then pulled the security footage log from that morning's hearing. One clip had been mysteriously deleted, but one remained, grainy and time-stamped, showing a black woman in shackles flanked by 2 white officers. Tasha stared at the frozen frame. The woman's face was bruised, her hair frayed, her eyes exhausted. But her posture, straight, proud, even in chains. Whoever this woman was, she didn't belong here. Elsewhere in the jail's administrative office, Officer Mercer scrolled through Danielle's intake file and frowned. Something had changed. Her fingerprint file now returned a match error instead of no match. Someone had attempted to cross-reference her prints again. He cursed, slammed the laptop shut, and stormed out. They were running out of time. That night, Danielle was pulled from her cell again. No explanation. Just a guard and a hallway lined with shadows. This time she was taken not to interrogation, but to a quiet, dimly lit room with no cameras. Inside stood Officer Hayes, leaning against the table like a man with too much power and too little fear. Let's make this simple, he said, flipping open a folder. You're a ghost now. No badge, no number, no lawyer, no voice. He stepped forward, leaned in. We've made people disappear before, you know. Easier than you think. Danielle looked up slowly. Her voice was steady, calm. And yet, you're still trying to get me to confess. Hayes smirked, but his eye twitched. See, she continued. "If I really was a nobody, you wouldn't care what I said. But you do care, because you're scared someone's listening." Hayes slammed the folder shut and walked out. The door locked behind her with a hollow click. 2 hours later, in a dim parking garage beneath the courthouse, Naomi Blake slipped into an unmarked sedan, heart pounding. She had driven through the night after tracing the ghost docket Tasha had sent anonymously from a burner email. The file she now held in her hands, Danielle's arrest photo, the falsified charges, the sealed hearing, the missing case logs. It was a paper trail written in panic, and at the center of it, a woman who was never meant to leave that jail alive. Back in her cell, Danielle sat with the napkin in her hands, reading the words again and again. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every creak outside the door felt like an ending. Every whisper in the hallway like a countdown. But beneath it all, something had shifted. She wasn't just surviving now. She was fighting. For her name. For her story. For every black woman who had vanished in plain sight while the world looked away. She paced her cell in silence, muscles sore, joints stiff, but her mind razor sharp. They erased my name. I'm going to make them remember it. Outside, the first storm raindrops hit the roof, and for the first time since her arrest, Danielle looked up and smiled. Not because she was free, but because she knew the walls were cracking. And no system, no judge, no badge, no lie could silence her forever. The storm was no longer outside. It had crept inside the walls of Montgomery County, into the jail cells, into the courthouse files, into the quiet corridors where secrets once lived untouched. The system had been seamless, bulletproof, cold, but now it was starting to fracture, and Danielle Royce could feel it. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The guards had forgotten her tray. They said her name didn't exist in the system anymore, so she didn't qualify. She was no longer an inmate. She was a ghost, a threat to be silenced, slowly, quietly. But what they didn't realize was that Danielle had trained her entire life to operate from the shadows. They didn't bury her. They activated her. From within the crumbling shell of her isolation, she started observing, listening. Every sound in the hallway was now a signal. Every motion of every guard, every glance, every shift in behavior. Danielle began cataloging them, like a living case file. Something had changed in the past 48 hours. Her presence wasn't just tolerated, it was feared. Her cell door creaked open less. Her name was avoided entirely. They were stalling, trying to buy time before someone found her, or before they made her disappear for good. In Washington, D.C., Naomi Blake stood in a closed-door meeting with Deputy Director Clark, slamming a thick binder on the conference table. Inside were redacted dockets, ghost logs, video stills, wiped fingerprints, and Danielle's sealed hearing date. "She's in Montgomery County Jail," Naomi said, voice steely. "They scrubbed her prints, her identity, everything." Clark scanned the file, his brow furrowing deeper by the second. "Who authorized this?" Naomi leaned in. "No one from us, but someone at the local level knew how to break protocol. A judge, a prosecutor, officers. It's coordinated." Clark exhaled slowly. "Then we're not dealing with local incompetence. We're dealing with institutional conspiracy." He looked up. "Bring in internal affairs. And get a clean tactical unit. Quiet entry, no warning." Naomi nodded, heart pounding. The machine had started moving. Inside the jail, Danielle sat cross-legged on her cot, the silence pressing in again. But this time it felt different, like the system was holding its breath. Then the voice came, through the speaker in the hallway. "Ross, let's go." She stood slowly, wrists instinctively behind her back. They didn't cuff her this time. A silent red flag. They walked her to the same interrogation room as before. But now it was empty. No folder. No tape recorder. Just Hayes, alone, unnerved. He closed the door behind her. "You know," he said, pacing slowly, "I thought you'd break by now." Danielle tilted her head. "That's because you don't understand people like me. You think silence is submission. It's not." He turned, eyes flaring. "You should have taken the plea. 7 years, then gone. But now we can't let you walk out of here." There it was. The threat, no longer implied, spoken. Danielle didn't blink. "Then do it. End it. Hayes moved closer. You think someone's coming for you? I know they are, she whispered. He stared at her, trying to find the cracks, but there were none. That night, two things happened simultaneously. In the jail, Mercer was seen shredding documents, surveillance logs, visitation logs, intake photos. The camera outside Danielle's cell mysteriously went dark at 2:43 a.m., and at that same moment a black SUV convoy crossed the state line, silent engines, tinted windows, DOJ clearance tags sealed beneath magnetic panels. Inside sat Naomi, clad in black, body armor zipped. She wasn't coming as a friend anymore. She was coming as justice. By sunrise, the jail was locked down. Naomi's team entered through the back service tunnel. No alarms, no radio chatter, just boots on the floor and weapons drawn. They moved fast, room to room, clearing offices, confiscating hard drives, detaining guards. A few tried to lie. Some begged ignorance. One fled. But none escaped. When Naomi reached the intake log room, she found what she was looking for, Danielle's fingerprint scan, date-stamped but marked no match. A deliberate override. The record had been altered manually. She photographed everything. Then she reached the lower-level cell block and found the one cell without a working camera. Danielle sat inside, half lit by early morning sunlight leaking through a barred window. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither said a word. Then Danielle smiled. Faint, worn, but real. Naomi's voice cracked slightly. We found you. Danielle stood up, slowly, steady. Told you I wasn't going down, she said. Naomi stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. Number, but now we take them down. Officers Mercer and Hayes were arrested on sight. Mercer resisted. He ended up face first on the floor, Naomi's knee pressing into his spine. Hayes tried to hide behind legal procedure. It didn't matter. Federal jurisdiction had been invoked. They were no longer shielded by local rules. 80 Whitman was served later that day at his home in front of his children. His wife screamed as federal agents cuffed him on the lawn. No one cheered, no one cried. The neighbors just watched. Judge Elias Granger, however, was missing, but not for long. Danielle was escorted out of the facility not in chains, but in a DOJ SUV. Her orange jumpsuit had been replaced with a black tactical jacket zipped up to the throat. Her bruises were still healing. Her name tag, Agent Royce, sat firmly stitched to her chest once again. She didn't speak on the ride back. She stared out the window at the blur of trees, of towns passing by. Everything looked the same, but she had changed. She had seen the inside of the system's belly. She had been digested. And now she was coming out the other side sharper, angrier, wiser. Back at the DOJ, she walked into the operations room, like a ghost returned from the dead. Every head turned. Conversation stopped. Some stared, some saluted. But Danielle didn't want praise. She wanted consequences. She stood before the director's board that afternoon. Naomi handed them the case file. These were not just bad cops, Danielle said. This was not just a rogue prosecutor. This was an entire county that knew how to erase someone, and nearly did. And I'm not the first. Just the first with a badge. She paused. If I had been a teacher, or a nurse, or a single mother, what then? No one answered. She stepped back, and the silence said everything. That night, alone in her apartment, Danielle stood in front of her bathroom mirror. She unzipped the jacket slowly, revealing the bruises along her ribs, the faint cut on her shoulder. But underneath all that, she was still standing. She reached into her drawer and pulled out her badge, not to wear, to remind herself. They tried to take her name, her face, her future. But in doing so, they gave her a new mission. Not just to investigate corruption, but to expose the very machine built to protect it. The courtroom was a cathedral of hypocrisy, bathed in cold fluorescent light and self-righteous silence. Rows of wooden pews lined the chamber, filled with reporters, clerks, and officers, all waiting, all whispering. The air hung heavy with anticipation, like a fuse smoldering just shy of the flame. Cameras clicked, eyes scanned. Whispers buzzed like flies. And in the very center of it all stood Danielle Royce, once erased, now resurrected. Her wrists were still red from the cuffs. Her body still bore the bruises of her captivity, but she stood tall, chin lifted, spine unshakable. Her federal badge sat hidden beneath her coat, tucked close to her heart like a secret ready to detonate. Across the courtroom sat Officer Landon Hayes and Officer Brent Mercer, flanked by their legal team. Whitman, the disgraced ADA, sat pale and sweating. Their confidence, once smug and invincible, had withered under the scrutiny of federal exposure. They weren't in control anymore. Not today. And presiding over this special hearing, summoned at the request of the DOJ, was Judge Anita Delacroix, a no-nonsense African-American federal judge who had made a name delivering blistering rebukes to institutional corruption. Today, she had one purpose: to let the truth breathe. The courtroom fell into silence as Judge Delacroix tapped her gavel once. We are here to determine the validity of the arrest, detainment, and prosecution of a woman the state referred to as Danielle Ross. We now know her real name is Supervisory Special Agent Danielle Royce, Department of Justice. This hearing will determine whether her constitutional rights were violated and whether a conspiracy to obstruct justice was committed by the accused. A collective ripple moved through the courtroom. Danielle stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, every motion echoing like thunder. "Agent Royce," Judge Delacroix began, "you may speak." Danielle looked out across the sea of faces, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some disgusted, that a black woman had survived what was meant to destroy her. But she wasn't here to ask for their belief. She was here to show them what belief had no power to deny. Her voice was low at first, measured, precise. "Your Honor, I was stopped on a routine drive by Officers Hayes and Mercer, supposedly for a broken tail light. I was compliant, calm, unarmed. Despite this, I was handcuffed, arrested, and had drugs planted in my trunk, evidence I had never seen before. I was booked under a false name. My DOJ identification was removed from the record. My fingerprints were marked as no match." A pause. The room was still. My identity wasn't just ignored, it was deleted. Now her voice hardened, gaining force. "For over a week, I was held in solitary confinement, denied legal counsel, denied a phone call, denied food and water on multiple occasions. I was paraded through a courtroom in shackles, mocked by a judge who saw my skin before he heard my name." Her eyes turned directly to the defense table. They looked at me and didn't see a woman. They saw a threat that needed to be crushed, and they almost did. She reached into her coat pocket, and for a split second the room tensed, guards shifting, attorneys rising slightly in alarm. Then, click. She pulled out a document and held it in the air. It bore the gold seal of the Department of Justice, the emblem shining like a verdict from heaven. "This," she said, "is the signed directive authorizing my covert investigation into racially motivated policing in this very county. It carries the signature of Deputy Director Samuel Clark." Gasps erupted. Cameras flashed. Danielle continued, "I was embedded to expose misconduct. I had no idea I would become the evidence." Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the gravity of the truth. "But the worst part isn't what they did to me. It's knowing they've done this before. To others. People without badges, people without names anyone cared to remember. The ones who never got a hearing, never got rescued. The ones buried in plea deals and prison cells because they couldn't fight back." She stepped closer to the center of the courtroom, voice rising. "I survived not because I'm stronger than them. I survived because someone saw me. A court clerk, a fellow agent, people who didn't look away." Now she was staring at the audience. "So, if this courtroom really stands for justice, then it's time to stop pretending this was a mistake. It was a method, one practiced and perfected by a system that was built not to protect, but to erase." She turned to Judge Delacroix. "And I'm here to make sure it never happens again." Judge Delacroix let the silence hang for a moment. No one breathed. Even the defense attorneys sat frozen. Then she looked down at her papers. "We will now hear from DOJ forensic analyst regarding the tampering of Agent Royce's records." But no one heard a word the analyst said, because Danielle's words were still ringing in their ears like sirens. At the back of the courtroom, Mercer was sweating. Hayes was pale. Their attorneys were whispering frantic damage control. And still Danielle stood, motionless, like a monument carved from steel. Her hands were steady, but inside her chest, her heart pounded like war drums. Not from fear, but from knowing this moment was the pivot, the moment the hunted became the witness. The accused became the architect. After hours of testimony and cross-examinations, Judge Delacroix called the hearing to a close. I will be issuing criminal indictments against the following individuals, she said sharply. Officers Hayes and Mercer for false arrest, perjury, and civil rights violations. Ada Whitman for prosecutorial misconduct. Judge Elias Granger for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Warrants for his arrest have been issued. The room exploded. Reporters scrambled for exits. Flashes lit the walls. Somewhere a man's voice shouted in disbelief. But in the center of it all, Danielle remained still, calm, untouchable. After the courtroom emptied, she stood alone in the hallway for a moment. The noise faded behind her. Naomi stepped beside her, hands folded. "You know what you just did?" Naomi asked quietly. Danielle nodded. "I unmasked the system." Naomi looked at her. "Number you cracked it." Danielle looked at her hands, still shaking, still healing. "I was never meant to make it to that podium," she said. "That courtroom wasn't built for my truth. But I made it ring anyway." She stepped forward, walking past the courtroom door, the press, the guards, walking through history like she belonged there. Because now everyone knew her name, and they would never erase it again. The storm that began in one forgotten courtroom had now erupted into a nationwide firestorm. Within 48 hours of Danielle Royce's testimony, headlines blazed across every major network. DOJ agent wrongfully jailed by corrupt officials. Racial targeting at the heart of local justice system. Federal agent unmasks conspiracy from within. Video clips of Danielle's calm, resolute courtroom speech went viral. Her DOJ badge held aloft like a weapon, her voice cutting through the din like a clarion call. To some, she was a warrior. To others, a mirror they were forced to look into. The country, fractured and weary from years of growing tension, suddenly had a new symbol of resistance. But for Danielle, the attention was not vindication. It was weight. Heavy, complicated, exhausting. She sat alone in a hotel suite in Washington, D.C., just hours before her scheduled congressional hearing. The city moved like clockwork below her window. Sirens wailing in the distance, horns blaring, people hustling, blind to the machine they were part of. She sipped lukewarm coffee, the steam curling around her face like smoke from a battlefield. She had survived, but she didn't feel victorious. She felt cracked, fractured. She hadn't slept through the night since her release. The sounds of steel doors slamming shut, of guards' mocking laughter, of her own breath catching in that cold concrete cell, they haunted her. Not just as memories, but as echoes of every other black woman who didn't get the microphone she now held. Naomi knocked gently and stepped inside. "They're ready for you." Danielle nodded. She rose, adjusted the blazer draped over her frame, and stared at her reflection. The woman who looked back wasn't the same agent who'd entered Montgomery County that day. She was older, not in years, but in ache, in fire, in burden. Capitol Hill was electric. Every seat in the hearing chamber was filled. Cameras lined the back wall. Activists, attorneys, lawmakers, and victims of similar injustices filled the gallery, holding signs, "Justice for the silenced. Reform now. We believe her." Danielle walked in, flanked by federal agents. No chains, no cuffs, just presence. Senator Robert Whitman, a conservative stalwart with ties to Montgomery County, cleared his throat. "Agent Royce," he began, "you're here today not just as a victim, but as a federal officer who was embedded in a local system to investigate misconduct. Many are questioning how something like this could happen to someone with your clearance." Danielle leaned forward. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were aflame. "I wasn't targeted despite being a federal agent. I was targeted because no one thought I looked like one." The room shifted. Whitman blinked. Danielle continued. "You want to know how it happened? Easy. You create a system where blackness is viewed as a threat. You feed it with bad laws, embolden it with unchecked power, and insulate it with silence. And then you act surprised when it devours someone like me." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the chamber like smoke after gunfire. "I spent 10 days in a cage, not because I broke the law, but because I fit a narrative. And you know the most terrifying part? If I didn't have a badge, if I had been a teacher, a nurse, a mother, no one would have come looking. I would have just disappeared." The silence was deafening. News of Danielle's testimony sparked congressional fury. An emergency task force was formed to investigate racial bias in local policing and judiciary systems. Montgomery County became ground zero for a federal probe that exposed layers of abuse, falsified records, wrongful convictions, planted evidence, coerced confessions. Danielle's case wasn't the exception. It was the blueprint. Judge Granger was arrested at a private airfield. He'd tried to flee. Ada Whitman accepted a plea deal in exchange for exposing 2 other counties with similar practices. Officers Hayes and Mercer were indicted on multiple federal charges and became the face of systemic corruption, a title they could never outrun. But the real reckoning was never about them. It was about the system that protected them. Weeks later, Danielle stood before a new audience, a room filled with law students, young activists, and survivors of wrongful convictions. She looked out at the faces, black, brown, queer, immigrant, all of them scarred in some way by the same system that had tried to erase her. She didn't speak from a podium. She sat in a circle. "You will be told to be quiet," she said, "to be polite, to trust the process." She shook her head. "Don't. You are not the problem. The system was designed to break you before you could ever speak. So your voice, it's already a rebellion." A young girl in the back began to cry. Danielle paused, walked over, and took her hand. "This isn't just about one woman," she whispered. "It's about all of us. And now they know we're not going away." Later that night, Danielle returned to her apartment. The lights were off. The city buzzed outside. She poured herself a glass of water, walked to the window, and stared out at the skyline. There would be more battles. The system wouldn't fall in a day. But a crack had formed, and through that crack, light was pouring in. She opened the drawer by her desk and pulled out her old badge. It was bent now, scratched, scarred. But so was she. And that, she realized, made them both harder to destroy. She set it down gently, not as a symbol of rank, but as a memory. Then she opened a new file, a fresh case, because Danielle Royce wasn't done. She had a system to rebuild. In today's world, Danielle Royce's story is not just fiction. It echoes the lived experiences of countless people silenced by systemic injustice. Her journey reveals how deeply racism can be embedded in institutions meant to protect, and how even those with authority can be rendered invisible when their identity doesn't fit societal expectations. The lesson is clear. Never assume that justice is impartial without accountability. Power unchecked can become a weapon, and silence in the face of abuse becomes complicity. But Danielle's resistance also shows us that one voice, armed with truth, courage, and persistence, can fracture an entire system of oppression. In today's life, we must remain vigilant, question what's presented as normal, and fight for a society where identity does not determine worth. Stand up, speak out, and remember, the most dangerous thing you can do to injustice is survive, and then tell the world what they tried to hide. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and comment 1 if you found the story meaningful. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.